Kanya, please tell me when you want me to begin.
We can start in 30 seconds.
No problem. Just tell me.
Sure, we can start.
Thank you. Welcome, everybody. Welcome to CSC's webinar. Am I audible? So, Kanya?
Yep.
Yes, ma'am, you are.
Fine. Okay. So, welcome, everybody. Welcome to CSC webinar on pandemics and industrial food farming, animal farming. It's a critical issue right now. The world is facing a disruption that we have never thought possible, a scale of a disruption, and it's because of a bug. But it's very important for us to understand the kind of pandemic, health pandemic that could await us if we don't really understand some of the issues that are happening in our world today, particularly when it comes to antimicrobial resistance. This is a critical issue. We all know antimicrobials or antibiotics, as we call them, are critical for us in our health. When we are seriously ill, that's what saves lives. That has been the miracle of modern medicine. But today, that is at risk because that bug that we thought that we had conquered is actually increasingly growing resistant. And that's because of the overuse of the antimicrobials and the misuse of the antimicrobials. CSC has been working particularly to look at two issues. There is the health issue, there is the human overuse issue, but there's also a pathway that comes in the antimicrobial resistance from our environment, from the food we eat. And that is really something that we have a deep interest in both understanding, but also making a difference in. So today's webinar, I think, comes at a very critical time when we have understood how important the issue of health is. We've understood the need for working on public health for the future because of COVID-19. And we need to be able to look deep on these issues. So let me begin the webinar and tell you a little bit of the program. We will be releasing our State of Health report. It's a biannual report. Down to Earth, CSC put together this report on the state of health in India once in 2 years to give you an overview on a particular sector. This report is on antibiotic resistance. It's called Body Burden. My colleague Vibha Varshney, who's the associate editor in Down to Earth, and the editor of this report, will give us an overview of the report, and then we will have an electronic release, whatever that means. We then have a panel discussion, which I will moderate, and we have excellent panelists, and I'm really grateful for all of them for giving us the time and for sharing their knowledge with us. I have Amit Khurana, who's the Program Director, Food and Toxins, Food Safety and Toxins at CSC, who will talk about the concerns we have at CSC and also the agenda that we are putting forward to control AMR. Really delighted to have Haley with us, who is Haley Getahun, Director of the Global Coordination and Partnership on AMR. It's the tripartite joint secretariat on AMR at WHO, which means that it's with FAO. And it's a critical partnership which actually helps to decide global response to this issue. And that's key, because without that, we will not succeed. Anuj Sharma, Technical Officer at WHO, also AMR Labs and IPC, but based in India. And he will talk about what he sees in the context of AMR in human health and the WHO guidelines during COVID-19. And then we are very privileged to have as well Koilin Nunan, scientific advisor of the Alliance to Save Our Antibiotics based in UK, an alliance which has been working tirelessly to really bring about this discussion at the global forum, but also to guide governments on what needs to be done. Sudhi Rangurath is at the Department of Animal Husbandry in Kerala, a state which has taken a lead on AMR strategy and is at the forefront of looking at how you could have safer options for antibiotics in food animal farming. So that's really the amazing panel we have in front of you. And we'll try and make sure we still have 20 minutes for questions at the end. So hold on. It's going to be a very, very solid webinar with information for all of you. So let me jump right into it and ask my colleague Vibha to make the presentation on the key findings of the report. And then we will have a release of the report as well.
Thank you, Sunita ji. I will just share my screen with the presentation. Just a minute. Just a minute. Yeah, so thank you for joining us for the release of our book, Body Burden, Antibiotic Resistance. Before we release it, let me just briefly tell you about what the book is all about. So the release comes at a time when the world is dealing with COVID-19 pandemic. But it is good to remember that AMR itself is a global pandemic. It affects each and every one of us. And antibiotic residues are all around us. They are in our food and they are in our environment and they're in our water. So it's something that affects each and every one of us. It's also a problem which is equivalent to the climate change crisis. And just like in climate change, it needs some kind of a global and local solutions that we need to work on. So I would tell you about why we need a book on AMR. So first of all, we see that simple infections are now life-threatening. Actually, we are back to a pre-antibiotic era when even a small cut could kill us. And we see that resistance can undo the gains that have been made by modern medicine. It's going to make treatment very expensive. It's going to push people into extreme poverty. There are estimates that show that it can reduce the global GDP by as much as 3.8% by 2050. However, we know very little about it in India. So this book is basically to bring this information together, whatever is available in India. So we are trying to bring it together. It also brings together all the elements of One Health approach that has been proposed by WHO, FAO, and OIE. So here's a brief overview of the contents page of the book. Basically, the book is divided into 5 sections. We have a special section on the data. Each section of the book has analysis. It has deep dives into some issues. It has expert opinions, and it has life hacks which can be followed by a general population. I will now briefly tell you about what we found in each of the chapters and each of the issues that we investigated. We see that there's a crisis of resistance all around us. There are stories of how AMR affects people, how treatment is becoming impossible, how resistant microbes are turning hospitals into deathbeds. It is leading into longer stays in the hospitals. It's leading to higher costs, unfortunately, higher mortality also. We see that it's going to make it very difficult to meet the disease eradication targets that the country has set, especially for diseases like bacterial diseases like tuberculosis and leprosy. What is of concern is the fact that use of antibiotics is generally used to mask the absence of a robust healthcare infrastructure. This is something that is of concern. We also found that when patients get admitted into hospitals, they're exposed to a variety of infections which are resistant to antibiotics that are generally used. The reason for this is that microbes are exposed to a variety of these chemicals in the hospital because they're used so much, and lack of sanitation and poor hygiene makes it very easy for these microbes to spread among patients. Though there are policies and guidelines, these are generally voluntary, and we find that the surveillance is poor. When it comes to antibiotic resistance in the environment, we found that AMR in environment was a neglected subject for very long. Actually, the focus on this came as late as 2015. These antibiotic residues and resistance genes and resistant microbes are released from pharma industry, animal farms, crop fields, feed factories, hospitals, waste, and even domestic sewage. We found that regulatory and research gaps exist. When in case of antibiotics in food, we found that these antibiotics are used in animal farms and crop fields and in other places for non-therapeutic purposes, generally as growth promoters. They were again used to compensate a lack of good practices in infection control. And CSC has done studies for the last decade or so, which shows that antibiotic residues are present in honey, chicken, and fast food. Other studies show that these are present in milk and eggs also. We found that some policies have been put in place, but we feel that more is needed. This is a problem because the problem of antibiotic resistance is more crucial because these exist despite 10 years of work on this. The issue came into fore in around 2010 when NDM1 came in news. So this is subject that we have been trying, we have campaigns since then to reduce promote the rational use of antimicrobials. We have multiple declarations, Jaipur Declaration, Chennai Declaration. We have policies, guidelines, but we see that there is poor implementation of these two. What we overall feel is that we need to ensure more on that the environment is clean. This will have a two-pronged effect. It would reduce disease burden. It will also reduce the triggers of antimicrobial resistance because the pressures would not be there on the microbe. As I mentioned earlier, we have a special section in the book on the data. This is very important because data is very important for taking decisions. It's an effort to put together data that is available in India. Also, we are talking about some diseases, bacterial diseases, which are crucial for India, things like TB, typhoid, cholera. And we have also profiled some troublesome pathogens in the country. So what is the take-home message? We find that the worst is still to come. Climate change is going to make it very difficult first of all, it will increase the amount of infection around us. It would also make it very difficult to treat them. We also find that controlling antibiotic use is very difficult because it's driven by profits. The pharma industry, health industry, and the food industry is not very likely to take it very simply that they reduce the use of antibiotics. However, we still need to find ways to use them judiciously, use them less, and find safer alternatives. We need policies that can promote the above. If we take an example from the climate change work that is going around in the world, we need both adaptation and mitigation strategies, just like in climate change. I will end the presentation with the image of the 3 books that we have come out in the body burden series. The first one is on infectious diseases. The second one is on lifestyle diseases. So it's interesting to note that we would not be able to control the infectious diseases or the lifestyle diseases if we have to face AMR also. Thank you. I will now put on the slide for the release of the book and request all of you to release the book.
Thank you, Vibha. It's a weird world when we are doing such releases, but this is the best we can do. So I think, thank you very much, Vibha. And this is the formal release of our report. antibiotic resistance, body burden. And I do hope you will take a look at it. There are some fascinating slides which, because of the lack of time, Vibha has not been able to show, but the infographics that Vibha has put together, particularly what concerns me is when I look at TB, because a disease that we need to worry about in India, and we've looked at the impact on TB with antibiotic resistance. And I think, I hope that this report, this book, will be useful to everyone, and we will build up much more understanding of the need to do things differently. Okay. Amit, can I now request you to go ahead with your slides? And in case you have, I think we fixed the technical glitch. If not, then Rajeshwari will do it for you.
Yeah, so is it visible?
Yeah. No.
No, it says it's paused. So can Rajeshwari help me?
Yeah.
Or Sukanya?
I will do it. Can you
Yeah.
just a moment?
Whatever you do, technology always has its own way. Okay.
Is it visible?
Yeah. Perfect. Just go to full screen, Rajeshwari. Perfect. Thank you. Amit, please go ahead.
Yeah. Okay, so thank you very much, Sunika, and good evening, everyone. I will specifically be talking about antimicrobial resistance and intensive food production. Next slide, please. So, as many of you would know, antimicrobial resistance happens when microorganisms change when they are exposed to antimicrobial drugs, such as antibiotics, antifungals, antivirals. Antibiotic resistance in particular happens when germs like bacteria develop the ability to defeat the drugs designed to actually kill them. That means the germs are not killed and they continue to grow. Pandemic, as the entire world knows by now, is actually a worldwide spread of a new disease. We have historically witnessed quite a lot of viral pandemics, such as of the influenza virus and the coronavirus. The point that I'm trying to make here is that AMR is a chronic pandemic of huge cumulative damage, and I will talk about why I say so in the subsequent slides. Next slide, please. So the impact of AMR is clearly huge, and it goes much beyond health. Essentially, existing antibiotics are becoming ineffective, leading to increased morbidity and mortality in both humans and animals. Longer hospital stays and expensive treatments make the healthcare expenditures higher. AMR can also cause productivity loss, food security, and lead to livelihood issues, and make attainment of sustainable goals difficult. And some of those are related to poverty, zero hunger, good health and well-being, so on and so forth. About USD 100 trillion has been estimated cumulative cost to the global economic output by 2050. Next slide, please. So this slide essentially tries to give a perspective on the deaths caused by AMR per year versus the deaths caused by different pandemics so far. Most of these are viral pandemics and that have happened for a limited duration. If you see on the left side of the slide, 7 lakh deaths globally are estimated to happen due to resistant infections, and worryingly, out of those, 230,000 deaths are due to multi-drug resistant or rifampicin resistant tuberculosis, and most cases and deaths, and this is about most cases and deaths happen in India and China. Then there are some specific estimates from US and EU, 35,000 deaths in US, 33,000 deaths in EU, and 56,000 neonatal deaths in case of India. On the right side of the slide, if you see what I'm trying to give a perspective is the number of deaths before the pandemics, in the pandemics before 2000, when the healthcare systems were not good. And you can see the number of deaths are quite high. But after 2000, if you would see, it's swine flu, which is estimated to have caused about 0.5 million to 0.57 million deaths. And now we see a huge number of deaths by COVID, which is ongoing, but up to 0.4 million as on today. But the clear contrast that I'm trying to share is that these are deaths which perhaps are less than the 7 lakh deaths which are happening every year. So as we speak now, and if we even take 10 years before, millions of deaths would have happened by AMRs so far. Next slide, please. But the real cause of worry is the future predictions. And this 0.7 million deaths per year is actually estimated to become 10 million deaths by 2050 per year if no action is taken. And unfortunately, about 90% of this is estimated to be in Asia and Africa. Next slide, please. So this AMR clearly has linkages with multiple sectors. We all know about human health. Next slide, please. Yeah, so we all know about human health issues, self-medication, over-the-counter sale, access versus access issue. But the focus of this presentation and what I'm trying to highlight is the animal sector, the plant sector, and of course the environment, the food and the environment collectively. So in animals, clearly, it's the intensive production system of poultry for eggs, let's say, for meat, fisheries, dairy, swine, where antibiotic overuse and misuse happens is the key concern. In plants, we have seen streptomycin, which is used in certain tuberculosis cases, but is registered at fungicides, is typically used in many countries, including India. And point sources and non-point sources are both are a concern with reference to environment, particularly the hotspots, which include waste from farms and factories and healthcare settings. It's the three AMR determinants, which is antibiotic-resistant bacteria, the genes, and the antibiotic residues, which basically move across the sector and systems and create problems. Next slide, please. This is just to share a glimpse of the confined settings and high intensity of birds and animals in different intensive animal farming settings. You can see poultry, dairy, pig, and aquaculture. Next slide, please. But what is the key concern? The fact that more food is now grown in intensive settings is a key concern. And the very fact that the nature of such industrial production system can create crisis is basically a very strong connecting link. So if you see most of the food from animals grown in high income countries is through intensive settings. And this intensification is growing in low and middle income countries due to high animal protein demand. And from 2000 to 2030, I mean, just an example, poultry meat demand in India is estimated to grow by over 8 times. Now let's take a look at the characteristics of these intensive systems which are creating these problems. Clearly, large-scale units with high stocking density, as we saw in the previous slide, genetically selected birds for productivity, not for disease resilience, confined conditions, limited focus on animal husbandry, huge dependence on commercial feed and inputs. Also these settings are known as animal feed operations in certain settings and factory farms. Often geographically concentrated, vertically integrated by large farmers, which also involves contract farming. And of course, this is agriculture, yet considered, this is industrial, yet considered agriculture, thereby does not get adequate regulatory attention. But all these characteristics lead to what? They lead to huge use of chemicals and drugs. Most of those is easy and economical substitute. What happens is essentially the routine antibiotic use for 2 main reasons: growth promotion and prevention of disease, even in the absence of clinical sign. Another cause is use of critically important antibiotics, particularly those which are of last resort. Next slide, please. Let's take a look at the connections in different pandemics, both antimicrobial resistance and different viral pandemics, the connections they have with the intensive food animal production settings. Now, how intensive food animal production settings leads to antimicrobial resistance is evident here. It's the low and subtherapeutic use doses of which create selection pressure in the gut bacteria of the animal or the bird. And this bacteria, once become resistant, spreads through food contact and waste. Next slide, please. I think, yeah. And another issue is the unmetabolized antibiotics in feces and antibiotic residues in food, which add to the problem. Coming to the viral pandemics, which are zoonotic, I mean, clearly you would see that 60% of all infectious diseases in humans are zoonotic diseases, and many originate in wildlife. Livestock often actually serves as an epidemiological bridge. Intensive conditions, which we just discussed in the last slide, reflect the monoculture effect, which is a vulnerability due to more contact opportunities among those who lack genetic diversity. Now, this can amplify viruses and attain them at a higher virulence. Avian influenza and swine flu are linked to intensive settings. The other aspect of this problem is the agriculture expansion for animal feed crops, for example, soy, wherein the boundaries between human, livestock, and forest basically diffuse. Ebola is one example where the outbreak was linked to forest losses, and then you have Ebola pathogens of Ebola, MERS, and SARS, and even SARS-CoV-2, which are believed to have wildlife reservoirs as long-term hosts. Next slide, please. That's just a schematic representation of 3 routes from an intensive poultry farm, which is food, contact, and waste. Next slide, please. This is just to give you a sense on what all areas CSC's team has worked on to help contain antimicrobial resistance. And you can see, starting about a decade ago, we started working in honey. We worked on poultry, figured out the issues in fish, then tried to explore the environmental issues through our poultry farm study. Also figured out how double standards of fast food multinationals in India versus other parts of the world. Then we studied antibiotic use in crops, studied feed, again studied the double standards, and also have helped our partners in the government of Zambia to develop integrated AMR surveillance framework, as well as build a roadmap to phase out non-therapeutic use. Next slide, please. So what do we need to do? It is clearly a time to change the way we grow our food, rethink our relationship in terms of how it is produced and its overall impact. Clearly, urgent steps are ban antibiotic use for growth promotion, regulate the feed well. It is typically not regulated in many geographies. Antibiotics should not be allowed. Restrict mass disease prevention, a clear area of contention which needs much greater attention. Limit the use of critically important antibiotics, particularly preserve those which are of highest priority. In parallel, reduce the need for chemicals by focusing on animal husbandry, biosecurity, alternatives, diagnostics, as well as the extension systems. For mid and long term, it is important that we limit the environmental spread of all AMR determinants, adopt an AMR-centric approach to manage waste, make standards, monitor, manage waste and effluents, as well as litter and manure. But most importantly, we have to reduce our dependence on intensive systems and grow more food from the other settings. Next slide, please.
Thank you, Amit.
Yeah.
Thank you, Amit.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. I think that gives us a good overview. I'm going to jump straight into it and ask Haley Getahun to give us his presentation on the global AMR strategy and how WHO is looking at this. Haley? Can we hear Haley? Is he on mute? Just let's check once. Haley, I think you're on mute.
Okay, sorry. Thank you very much, Sunita, for the opportunity to present on the tripartite response on antimicrobial resistance. As you all know, the tripartite organizations constitute the Food and Agricultural Organization, the Organization of Animal Health, and WHO. Both WHO and FAO are the UN organizations, while the Organization of Antimicrobial, the Organization of Animal Health is intergovernmental, but not UN. So these 3 organizations have been working since the 1960s on antimicrobial resistance, in collaborative way. So I'm not going to summarize what has happened since then, but I would like to start from the recent progress, which started in 2015 when the Global Action Plan was developed by WHO and then subsequently was endorsed by FAO and OI governing bodies, which clearly giving 5 strategic objectives how we can handle antimicrobial resistance in a multi-sectoral manner, focusing on the critical stakeholders of human health, animal health, as well as the environment, and not forgetting the food and the feed sector, which has been mentioned in the earlier presentation. Next slide. The 2016 was actually a very landmark year for antimicrobial resistance. This is when all 194 countries come together and reach a political agreement through a declaration that they will prioritize antimicrobial resistance at the highest possible level politically. And the political declaration has actually also called for the UN Secretary General to establish an interagency coordination group that will guide and give advice and suggestions how the world can take antimicrobial resistance in a renewed commitment. Next. So the ISG, when it was established, it has two groups, organizations, 14 organizations, as you see it here in this slide, and also 14 individual experts who were elected based on their individual expertise, and who were privileged to have Sunita as one of those individual experts in the ISG. And the ISG was also co-chaired by the Deputy Secretary General of UN and the WHO Director General, and it has 3 conveners. So next slide. So the ISG, after almost 2 years of deliberation, has handed over its report to the Secretary General in April 2019. Which was also, as you see on this slide, has massive media coverage. And the ISCG has put 14 recommendations how we can take forward in order to address, and actually also declared antimicrobial resistance as a global crisis. And the focus of the ISCG recommendation has been to catalyze and bring change and impact at country level. And it also promotes the research and development, as well as for the engagement of civil society, the private sector, and the public sector. And it really highlights that we cannot win the battle of antimicrobial resistance without having such broader cooperation and collaboration. So as part of the process, the UN Secretary General endorsed the ISCG recommendations, and then he wrote his report to member states to take into consideration of the ISCG recommendations that was released in June 2019. Next slide. And as part of that report, the Secretary General requested the tripartite organizations, UN, FAO, WHO, and OIE, to establish a tripartite joint secretariat. Number one, to coordinate the global response, which actually ISCG has further consolidated by bringing the mandate of addressing in a multi-sectoral manner lies in the tripartite organizations. Next. So that's why the 3 organizations also immediately endorsed the ISCG recommendations through their governance bodies resolutions. You can see the timeline actually in May 2019 for both OIE and WHO, and the FAO in 2019. So you can see even the timeline, how fast these organizations and their member states actually taken up these recommendations for implementation. Next slide. Moreover, the tripartite have also worked together, number one, to establish a work plan where they can work together by bringing AMR into a larger portfolio, and also to establish a tripartite trust fund, a multi-partner trust fund that will help them to take forward their joint activities to bring impact and result at country level. So as you can see here in this slide, there has been quite high level engagement of the Director Generals focusing on AMR, how to take this forward. And also the tripartite organizations, next slide, agreed to establish the tripartite joint secretariat. I have the privilege of directing, and based in WHO, but also having dedicated staff from FAO and OIE to take this into a truly multi-sectoral manner for country impact and result. So the overall purpose of the tripartite joint secretariat is to enhance the global promotion, advocacy, and also implement the IACG recommendations. The IACG has also recommended some governance recommendations where we can really keep the advocacy, the global momentum of antimicrobial resistance, and this secretariat will give that service. In addition, the work plan for the joint activities of the tripartite will also be coordinated by the secretariat, and we have also operationalized the antimicrobial multi-partner trust fund, for which we were able to mobilize 13 million US dollar, and now started investing into helping country result and impact in 9 countries. Next. So what has been done so far is tripartite joint secretariat, as I said, have been quite upfront in terms of leading the global response and also coordinating the implementation of the ICG recommendations. So one will be the Global Leaders Group, which will soon be established to lead and advise and advocate globally. And we have also one of the critical gaps in the global response is really not having proper data. We don't know the magnitude. I know the earlier presenter presented some of the data, but that data has been quite old, and it has also been based on limited data. So we need to raise this, and we need to look the evidence gap, and there will be an independent panel that will be established based on the model of the climate IPCC to help the antimicrobial agenda. One other achievement of the tripartite joint secretariat is also to now fix the celebration of the World Antibiotic Awareness Week, which used to change every year in November, but now it is fixed between 18 and 24 November as of this year. So this will also help the WOW to be everybody's business. And we are now also working to coordinate among critical global organizations how they can actually contribute based on their mandate to help this global response. We are working to develop a voluntary division of labor of the tripartite, as well as other key organizations that will be coming very soon. So in a very short way, this is what has happened in the tripartite agencies, and I'm happy to respond for any questions later. Thank you. I am done.
I think Sunita ji has gone offline. So Rajeshwari or Amit, would you take over?
Yes, I think we can move to the next presentation. It is by Dr. Anuj Sharma. Dr. Anuj Sharma is the technical officer for AMR Labs and IPC at the WHO India office. And he's going to talk to us about COVID management and related and its links to antibiotic use and antibiotic resistance. Yes, Dr. Sharma.
Thank you, Dr. Rajeshwari. When I was asked to talk about this topic, COVID management and the linkage with antibiotic use and antibiotic resistance, I tried searching for literature, and I could not find much publications from India, but I was able to find a number of publications in a number of journals as well as some WHO guidance documents. So on the basis of this, I have compiled this presentation, and I'll share the summary of these publications. The COVID-19 pandemic has actually led to a lot of use of antibiotics as well. Because if we look at the previous influenza pandemics, they have been always associated with bacterial co-infections, which has also been associated with mortality. And in influenza, the co-infections have varied between 11 to 35%, and the organisms are primarily Strep pneumoniae and Staph aureus. However, in COVID-19 patients, secondary or co-infections are variable. They are less than influenza, and they have a different co-pathogen profile. Although the co-infections are less, the proportion is much higher in the critically ill patients who are in the hospital. Now, if you look at the data from China, there are a number of studies, and the reviews have found that co-infections have varied between 5 to 27%. And in ICU patients, this has varied between 14 to 44%. And especially the co-infections have been higher in those who have succumbed to the infection. Another review actually found that 7% of hospitalized patients had a bacterial co-infection, with the ICU having a 14%, with the range of 5 to 26% of co-infections. Another systematic review found only 8% of hospitalized patients having co-infections. And in COVID patients, the co-infections have been with a number of bacteria and also fungi. If you look at antibiotic use, the COVID has also actually led to an increase in antibiotic use, because the triad of cough, fever, and radiological infiltrates classically makes you think of a community-acquired pneumonia, and COVID is one of the causes. Also, the sepsis and the septic shock during a COVID infection requires antibiotics. Telemedicine is another area which has been increasing, especially due to the lockdowns. And it has been seen that telemedicine leads to antibiotic overprescriptions as a safety netting as compared to face-to-face consultations. Also, mechanical ventilation, immune dysregulation, corticosteroids for modulating the immune response also lead to the patient being more susceptible to bacterial infections. All this has led to widespread antibiotic use, both for directed treatment as well as for empiric treatment. And antibiotic use has been especially more widespread in China and in Asia as compared to some of the other countries, especially USA and Europe. And in China, they found that nearly 58% of the patients got an antibiotic, and nearly all the patients in the ICU did receive antibiotics. Another review found that more than 70% of the patients received antibiotics, although only 10% or less than 10% had a documented bacterial co-infection. Now, this is a catch-22 situation, that the antibiotic treatment also leads to an underestimation of bacterial co-infections because of hampering the culture results. WHO came out with the clinical management of COVID-19 guidelines for suspect or confirmed COVID-19 patients. And for mild cases, the recommendation is not to use any antibiotics. For moderate cases, the recommendation is no antibiotics unless there is a clinical suspicion of a bacterial infection. And if then, to use antibiotics from the access group of antibiotics from the AWARE classification. In severe hospitalized patients, it is recommended to use empiric antibiotics to treat all likely pathogens based on a clinical judgment, the patient host factors, and the local epidemiology and the resistance profiles. To start the treatment as soon as possible, preferably within 1 hour of initial assessment, to collect blood cultures before starting treatment, and to assess the treatment on a daily basis, and to look for de-escalation when possible. Also, it is recommended to test for other etiologies, especially based on local epidemiology and clinical symptoms, especially malaria, dengue, and typhoid fever, especially in India. Also look for other respiratory infections, which could be viral, bacterial, or fungal, using the lower respiratory specimens. And you have a large number of other viruses which could be associated with the pneumonia, either as co-infections or as alternate diagnosis. Again, the empiric antibiotic treatment should be based on the clinical diagnosis. Is it a community-acquired pneumonia, hospital-associated pneumonia, or treatment of sepsis? WHO also came out with this toolkit on clinical care for SARI patients, which has been adapted for COVID-19, and for severe pneumonia, IV antibiotics are recommended, and the treatment regimen for adults and children are very clearly laid out. The COVID pandemic actually provides us an opportunity for antibiotic stewardship. We need to keep in mind to reserve the high-end antibiotics for serious patients, ensure microbiology investigations samples are taken before antibiotic treatment, to reassess and evaluate treatment on a daily basis and stop at the earliest, switch to oral antibiotics when possible, and not extend treatment beyond 5 days, use access group of antibiotics as the first line, use the laboratory biomarkers for infections to aid when antibiotics are needed along with COVID. Also an opportunity to prevent ventilator-associated pneumonia and other healthcare-associated infections, avoid prophylactic use of antibiotics, and where needed, treat other infections like UTIs, skin and soft tissue infections, and abdominal infections, which may be there. The COVID pandemic also has given us some benefits. There's a very strong focus on infection prevention and control, especially hand hygiene. And these are especially important for preventing infections which lead to antibiotic misuse. So this is a big plus for AMR containment. Social distancing or physical distancing, which is a better term, since we are connected socially through online and social media apps. This has also reduced infections. The pandemic has also led to a whole of government and a whole of society approach, and health services have been recognized as a critical need. And also the investments in health system strengthening have been perceived as important. At the WHO Country Office for India, I have been redesignated as the infection prevention and control focal point as well. And we have collated recent publications on COVID-19, which are relevant for preventing infections and AMR containment in India with a focus on COVID. And we've had these 3 COVID samikshas, IPC samikshas, which have publications from scientific journals, WHO guidelines, Ministry of Health and other Government of India guidelines, IEC and training resources, and a section on AMR and COVID. All these are available. The 3 issues which have been released in April, May, and June are available on the WHO website. And the link is available here. I would just like to conclude by saying that this pandemic provides us an opportunity to use antibiotics judiciously for the bacterial co-infections. We need better studies based on rigorous case definitions, because all the reviews have identified the gaps in knowledge on co-infections as well as the antibiotic use. The pandemic also provides us opportunities in alignment with the Global Action Plan as elucidated by Dr. Haley on AMR, especially Objective 2 for diagnostic stewardship, Objective 3 for infection prevention and control, and Objective 4 for antimicrobial stewardship. And hopefully we will have better health services after the pandemic. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Anuj. Thank you very much. Coilin, can I now invite you? Sorry, I disappeared, but my light went. This is Delhi. Coilin?
Hello. Thank you very much for inviting me. I'm just trying to... do you have my presentation?
Yes, absolutely. Please.
Great. Thank you very much. So I'd like to talk about the need to take a one health approach to public health, which recognizes that human health is closely related to animal health and to our environmental health. And I believe that this means that we need to be rethinking livestock production and be moving away from industrial intensive forms of livestock farming, which are inherently unhealthy. So as we have already been hearing, antibiotic use in animals is a contributor to antibiotic resistance. Overall, antibiotic use in animals globally represents an estimated 73% of all antibiotic use, and human antibiotic use represents 37%. Now, both human and veterinary antibiotic use are contributing to the human health antibiotic resistance crisis. Most of the resistance is believed to come from human antibiotic use, but for a wide range of bacteria, be it E. coli, Salmonella, Campylobacter, MRSA, Enterococci, maybe even Klebsiella, farm antibiotic use is contributing. And it is estimated that the overall number of deaths, as we've heard from Amit, from antibiotic resistance may grow from 700,000 annually today to 10 million by 2050 if we don't take action and we continue with business as usual. The question of whether farm antibiotic use contributes to resistance in human infections has been somewhat controversial, but a government review in the UK and most international institutions recognize that it does. And a government review found that a large majority of the scientific papers find that farm antibiotic use is contributing to the resistance problem. Now, I can't go through all of the examples, but one example of an important recent example has been the emergence of resistance to colistin, a last resort antibiotic used in human medicine when all other antibiotics are failing. And in 2015, colistin resistance was first detected in China, where colistin was being used as a growth promoter in livestock. And it was found in livestock, in retail meat, and in human infections. We know that at the time, colistin was not being used in humans at all in China. And so it was very clear that this was coming from livestock. Although it was first found in China, it was actually subsequently found to be present throughout many countries around the world because of this use in livestock. Another perhaps less well-known example, but very important nevertheless, has been the emergence of a strain of Clostridium difficile, which was first found in intensively farmed pigs in the United States, a strain called ribotype 078. It was subsequently found also in intensively farmed pigs in European countries and in human infections in the United States, and it became a major human strain in Europe as well. And scientists have shown that it is very likely to be associated with the very wide overuse of tetracycline antibiotics in farming. Now, whereas antibiotics in human medicine are used to overwhelmingly to treat individuals and to improve health, to treat disease. And while it is true that this also occurs in farming, the reality is that globally, the vast majority of antibiotic use in farming is as a productivity tool. Some countries around the world still allow antibiotic use as growth promoters, but even those such as European countries which have banned growth promoters continue very often to use it for routine disease prevention as a productivity tool. And that is why in Europe, nearly 90% of antibiotic use is mass medication rather than the individual treatment of sick animals. And this use as a productivity tool of antibiotics has enabled this growing intensification and also very large increases in global meat consumption. So this graph shows the increase in percentages of meat consumption over the last decades. And by far the largest increase has been in pig and poultry meat, where antibiotic use is the highest and where we tend to have very intensive systems. So this antibiotic use has led to the growth of industrial farming systems, particularly in the rich countries, but this is now spreading to LMICs, as Amit spoke about earlier. So these are examples of, this is a poultry farm in the UK with tens of thousands of birds, kept entirely legally according to EU and British standards, where each bird has less than an A4 sheet of paper to move around in. And obviously in these sorts of conditions, bacterial diseases and viral diseases emerge and spread very, very easily. And equally, we find very intensive conditions in Europe for the farming of pigs. In some cases, the emergence of certain viral diseases, such as PRRS, actually have many secondary bacterial infections, and this actually increases the use of antibiotics. So the many bacterial infections are, of course, controlled through antibiotics and other medications, and sometimes also we have medications which help control viral diseases, but we also have many viral diseases which are not well controlled at all. Now, a UNEP Frontiers report in 2006 has said that the demand for livestock products leads to more intensive production, and this helps the disease transmission, as the stock are kept closely together and are very often genetically very similar, and this enables the disease to spread more quickly because of this vulnerability known as the monoculture effect. Now, one such viral disease spreading at the moment, particularly in China and certain Asian countries, and also very widely in Eastern Europe, is African swine fever. And this is causing a massive epidemic in pigs. It is estimated that in China alone, in the last 2 or 3 years, it has killed perhaps up to 200 million pigs. Now, fortunately, this disease cannot transfer to humans, but in other cases, many bacteria and viruses can transmit to humans. And in particular, it is estimated that 75% of all emerging infectious diseases in humans come from animals. Now, very often these may originate in wildlife, but according to the UNEP study, livestock often serve as an epidemiological bridge between wildlife and human infections. And this is especially the case for intensively reared livestock, which are often genetically similar, as we've heard. And this therefore means that they have less resilience. Now, one example of a virus which has spread from intensively farmed animals is a high pathogenic avian swine flu. Now, low pathogenic strains are known to be present in wild birds and can transmit to farm birds, but when they do, they very often cause just mild infections. However, where there is a dense poultry environment, we get many cycles of infections, and the viruses mutate and adapt to their new hosts and become more pathogenic. And in some cases, some of these strains may pass on to humans and cause infections, including death. So according to the Scientific Task Force on Avian Influenza and Wild Birds, highly pathogenic avian influenza viruses are essentially products of intensively farmed poultry, the incidence of which has increased dramatically with the greatly enhanced volume of poultry production around the world. In general, they should be viewed as something artificial made possible by intensive poultry production techniques. We've also, in 2009, had a major pandemic of what became known as swine flu. It first emerged in North America, and ultimately it is estimated it killed between 150,000 and 575,000 people. We know that it was of animal origin. We don't know exactly where and how it emerged, but genetic analyses have linked this pandemic strain to a triple reassortant strain that circulated in pigs for years. It was a mix of pig, avian, and human influenza viruses, which combined with another pig strain. And this is known as, pigs are often viewed as mixing vessels for influenza. And it's important to realize that flu circulates, is a seasonal disease in humans, but in intensive pig farming, it circulates all year round, which provides many opportunities for the emergence of new pathogenic strains. The Nipah virus is another virus which spread, in this case, from bats to pigs to humans. And it emerged in Malaysia in 1999, and it was associated with the encroachment of large commercial pig farms into forested areas of high fruit bat activity. It killed over 100 humans, many of them pig farmers, but the high pig and farm density led to rapid spread in pigs, and over 1 million pigs were culled. Now, COVID-19 is a zoonosis too. The origin is still not proven, but it is strongly believed to have been transmitted from bats, possibly by an intermediate species, maybe pangolins. Attempts to experimentally infect small numbers rather of various animals with the new virus failed to infect pigs or chickens. So this suggests that livestock may not be directly involved in the emergence of this new pathogen. However, probably more research needs to be done into this, particularly in view of the fact that an in vitro study looking at cell lines from many different animals found that the virus causing COVID-19 replicated most robustly in non-human primate cells and pig cells. Now, this particular coronavirus may not have come from pigs, but coronaviruses generally are a major problem in intensive pig farming. Pigs are susceptible to infection by at least 6 different coronaviruses, generally believed to be of bat or bird origin, and they've caused huge economic costs, and some are considered to be public health threats. Several have emerged in pigs in China in recent years, and there are really significant concerns were being expressed by Chinese scientists about the potential for these viruses, these coronaviruses, to transmit to humans just in recent years. So one virus emerged.
Colin,
yes?
Can I ask you to rush? There's too many questions. I need to
Right. So another issue is habitat deforestation and emerging infectious diseases. That scientists generally believe that habitat loss, deforestation, and loss of biodiversity are contributing to the emergence of new infectious diseases, including possibly COVID-19. But according to the Food and Agriculture Organization, 80% of global deforestation is occurring to clear land for agriculture, and very often this is for pasture or for the growing of feed. And so I'll just skip then, to my last slide, which is essentially saying that what we really need is a genuine One Health approach. And this means an end to routine antibiotic use in livestock, including an end to preventative mass medication and growth promotion. We need major improvements to animal husbandry. Intensive indoor farming is inherently unhealthy for animals and humans. We recognize with COVID-19 the importance of social distancing and the fact that the virus does not transmit nearly as easily outdoors. So why do we think that disease spread for livestock is any different? And finally, ecosystems must be protected as diversity provides resilience, which helps limit the spread of disease. But ecosystems are likely to suffer further damage if the global expansion of intensive livestock farming continues. Thank you.
Thank you, Colin. Thank you. Sudhi, I'm going to jump right into it and ask you to speak. We have a storm coming in Delhi, and a lot of our power situation is unreliable. I understand in Kerala you've got power again. So please go ahead, Sudhi. Colin, can you stop sharing? Yes. Sudhi, can you share? Sudhi there?
Yeah, I'm there.
Wonderful. Sudhi, please go ahead.
My video is not opening.
Your
Host has stopped it actually.
okay. Rajeshwari, can you
Yes.
share Sudhi's? Something is wrong. Host is shared. So Sudhi, it's there.
Yeah.
Please go ahead.
Thank you, ma'am. Am I audible?
Yes, absolutely.
So, thank you, FSC, for giving me this opportunity. And all the panelists have given a nice introduction about the topic. So, I can just without any introduction, we can rightly jump to my topic, that is safer options to antibiotics. And actually, the human population has grown exponentially, and therefore, we are outnumbered by our domestic animals. Hardly 5 or 6 animals has actually taken the 95% of the biomass. So what is happening is a lot of niche jumping is happening. Those of microorganisms which were having a dynamic equilibrium with very wild hosts is jumping to other species. These are the results of these are the causes of the pandemics, and right now we are going through such pandemics, and antimicrobial resistance that also has emerged as a pandemic now. So these are all stresses. It causes climate change and a lot of exploitation of the natural resources, and these all precipitates as diseases. As I have mentioned in the slide, the stress precipitates as diseases. It can be environmental, physiological, emotional, or production-related stress. The next slide, please. And the options to give away with antibiotics, or we can use very minimal quantity of antibiotics to do the livestock operations, and there are better ways of management. That includes, the first thing, this slide mentions a lot about animal husbandry packages. That is, by providing good quality of and right quantity of ventilation, which is having 21% oxygen instead of ammonia load or carbon monoxide load or such methane gases. The water sanitation is an important part. If you are providing good quality water, definitely that is going to help the growth and other things. And nutrition, as Colleen has rightly mentioned, the birds are getting hardly an A4 sheet to stand. So provision of optimal space, the better litter management and the environment management, and the era of climate changes, we need to intervene in the in-house mitigation strategies in summer and in winter. Automations to prevent the human laxity. That is, humans have a tendency to do away with things. So definitely automations can help, and this will decrease the microbial load also. And the disinfections and of the in-house and other premises also has to be done. These are the animal husbandry packages. We can reduce the usage of antibiotics. Next slide, please. And there is the concept of the second concept is of biosecurity. There is a conceptual biosecurity where no microorganism gets into the system and nothing goes out. This is the concept of biosecurity. It can be attained through structural and operational methods. I'm not mentioning much about this. Everybody will be knowing this. Next slide, please. And then comes the vaccination. This good old technique. We need to prepare a big vaccination schedule based on surveillance and monitoring of which all diseases are happening and which are the diseases which may arise. And based on that vaccination schedule, we have to adhere it and implement it properly. And we have to monitor that by serum titer evaluation, whether titer is waning off, and we need to give booster doses and such things. And vaccination is a better method to prevent diseases and thereby the usage of antibiotics. Next slide, please. Specific diagnosis definitely help. Lab facilities must be enhanced, and expediting the specific diagnosis with the good quality lab support, we can definitely prevent the prophylactic and such things, metaphylactic usage of antibiotics, and thus prevent the squandering of antibiotics. So, reserving it for the future use of human disease. AMR must be given the utmost priority while using it. Next slide. These are the other options which are coming up. The microbiome, the concept of microbiome is we are actually outnumbered by the microorganisms which live within and outside our body. Actually, they are 10 times to human cells, and definitely then other animals also. And they actually influence even the diseases mentioned here, includes depression, irritable bowel diseases, allergy, obesity, and all these new generation lifestyle diseases are attributed to the microbiome and their diversity. So a lot of studies and papers are getting published in the last 10, 20 years, and a lot of probiotic and prebiotics have also emerged. And the fecal microbial transplantation has already started got approval and it's being used for C. diff treatment, superbug treatment when they get a superbug infection like C. diff. And also in certain cases, studies are going on with diabetes and autism-related diseases. So fecal microbial transplantation is an practical application of the microbiome concept, and this also is coming up in a real manner. I have used probiotics in my poultry while doing my breeder consultancy and other things. And I have noticed that feeding with lactobacillus in the early ages instead of antibiotics, pumping them with antibiotics, has really helped. Even the femoral head necrosis, which made the broiler birds, they cannot stand on their legs, was corrected with uh, the lactobacillus and other cultures. So this will be of good use in future. Next slide, please. The other emerging thing is of regarding the phage therapy. Bacteria also get influenza and other things like they also get viral infections, and the phages, which are very specific to the specific bacteria. So we may not use a broad spectrum antibiotic and kill all the microorganisms. Instead, we can go for that specific, that to strain specific bacteria. And these phages are already available. Indian Veterinary Research Institute and other things are having these phages for E. coli and other things. So this can be used as phage therapy. They will go inside the bacteria and they will kill only that specific bacteria, so the infections can be treated by phages. Another line of approach, next slide please, is again based on the lysine. That is, lysine is the enzyme which is produced by the bacteriophages inside the bacteria after those their their, their body parts are built. And these bacteriophages, lysins, can be applied from the external environment, and these will lyse the bacterial cell wall, resulting in the bactericidal activity. So this lysine therapy is also coming up. I think Rockefeller Institute is doing wonderful work on this line, and they could really handle the issue. Lysine.
Okay.
Next thing, it's antimicrobial proteins and peptides. We all carry a lot of antibacterial things in our secretions and in our natural orifices. So lysozyme is one of such enzymes in antibacterial protein, and it really helps in fighting some of the infections. And this is already available in poultry market, and we are using lysozyme as an antibacterial thing. And there are antibacterial, antiviral, you can go to the slide, and it's all secreted from various sources such as silk moth, frog, human porcine, and other things. And a lot of things are coming up as antimicrobial agents.
Okay.
Next slide, please. And this is another beautiful area of research. It's quorum sensing, that is, bacteria also communicate amongst themselves. Actually, it's called quorum sensing. They secrete certain signal chemical molecules, and based on those numbers, if they are having a low intensity or high intensity, then only all the bacteria will act together. Beautiful studies have happened in bob, squid, Hawaiian squid, with Vibrio fishery bacteria, and a lot of understanding is coming up. And based on this technology, this knowledge is put into technology by we have decoded the structure of these chemicals, and we have artificially synthesized that. There are methods of sequestering these signals such that the bacterial colonies may be made to mute, or they cannot hear what is happening, and thus they cannot exhibit their virulence, and such things are happening. So there are 3-4 methods using quorum sensing. One is these chemicals are taken, sequestered away. Second method is to mute the other bacteria so that their virulence cannot be exhibited. And there are even synthetic chemicals can be added so that the bacteria cannot identify. And probiotic things also act in a similar manner, and the microbiome concept also comes here. When we have a big colony of bacteria in our gut, then the pathogenic so-called E. coli or other bacteria cannot show their effect based on these chemical signals or the language which they talk. So that's the application of quorum sensing technology. It has also gone further. Next slide, please. This is another important area whereby the animal's immunity can be modified. There are a lot of chemicals like you have recently heard about the hydroxychloroquine, the levamisole part, the ivermectin part, and there are also certain elements like chromium, selenium, zinc, and other things. This is actually a picture of a Euglena gracilis. This Euglena is made to synthesize a bacterial cell wall-like structure, which will be mistaken by the human body or any other animal's body as a pathogen-associated molecular patterns, PAMs, we call it. So pathogen-associated molecular patterns will be identified by our immune cells, and they will trigger just like a firewall, preventing some immunities. It's something which can create innate immunity. So these things are available in the market. I have mentioned the name also. It's Alita, or a lot of things are there.
Sudhi,
So
can I ask you, these are good examples, but can we, I mean, essentially, can you move on?
Yeah,
Sorry.
of course. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. I think there are herbal and alternative treatments like ginger, rhizome, turmeric, and the ginkgo biloba, and such things are there. This is my last slide. And last slide, please. 8th one. So this is another important technology coming up. It has come in 2002, and now it's hardly 3 years since it is applied in all the fields. It's called CRISPR-Cas9 gene editing technology. It is a very specific gene editing tool where the cluster and the palindromes, that is the patterns of purines and pyridines, can be read, and correct incisions can be made in the correct to the base pair level. So it's very specific, and this can be used in animal husbandry in their purines and great grandparent stocks, so that a lot of gene editing can happen, and actually the disease resistance can be introduced in the genes, and such things are coming up. And it's already current CRISPR applications is disease resistance, altered body composition, etc. And now the efficiency can also be improved, and it also can be undertaken in agriculture and other sector, and also for the diagnostic tools.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sudhi. I think basically many options are coming to antibiotics, and that is very clear. Let me now jump straight into the questions that I have. I've read them all, and I've sort of looked at some of the questions that are important for our discussions here, and I will ask different people to speak. And I do want to apologize. I have complaints from people saying that the speaker should have been given more time. But that is the problem with webinars. You need to keep the time restricted. So please forgive me on that. Everybody did give us a good overview. Let me jump straight in. Haley, first question, the elements of the One Health approach. Can I ask you for a crisp, brief answer on this?
Thank you very much. So the One Health approach, as it was described, it encompasses all the sectors. It should encompass all the sectors that have connection and influence on antimicrobial resistance, and both in the generation and in the transmission. And this concept has been there, and it should be a sort of combination of interventions and activities. But we also recognize the difficulty of simplifying of this concept. And this is also one of the issues that came out through the deliberations of the Interagency Coordination Group, how to actually simplify this concept and make it action-oriented to bring some impact. So basically what we are saying is these are concerted actions that needs to deal with the food industry, the food sector, the feed sector, the production of animal feed, which also involves the use of antimicrobials, environment and human health, and plants, as well as animal health.
Wonderful. That's a very clear answer. Anuj, this connection between COVID spread and AMR, people have asked this. You've given some answer in terms of the increased use of antibiotics, but would you like to elaborate on that a little bit?
I actually tried to look for literature from India. Unfortunately, I could not find, I mean, it might be there, I could not find publications from India. And even the global publications that we had, a lot of them identified the biggest lacuna as that most of the reviews failed to capture the diagnostic tests done So the co-infections, what were the criteria used, the antibiotics, the day it was started, how long it was continued. A lot of these were gaps which were identified in these systematic reviews. So hopefully in times to come, we will have better data on this. But one thing, this is a new virus, and especially the data from China and Asian continent has found more use of antibiotics. Data from US has shown very less use of antibiotics in COVID patients.
Okay, good. No, thank you. That clarifies it. Amit, before I get to the most contentious issue, there's been a huge discussion going on both on chat and Q&A, and some very angry people out there. But let me ask you one specific question that has been raised. Is the issue of your fast food study? What did you find? And I also have someone from Domino's here who has in fact posted that they have been checking antibiotic use in the food that they are buying, and they have become very conscious of it, and a question that has been asked. So Amit, what then is the study on fast food industry and antibiotic?
Yeah, so in 2017, we figured out that due to the consumer pressure and investor pressure, a lot of global fast food multinational companies, which are typically based out of US, have taken much stronger action to eliminate the antibiotic misuse in their meat supply chains. They started off with poultry, then they are moving on to swine and cattle for beef. Now, and one of the press release made by one of the company was basically highlighted their global plan of elimination, and India was nowhere there till 2027. Then that basically made us realize that these global multinational companies are not very keen to eliminate antibiotic misuse in India. And we did a study and clearly found double standards. Most of these companies, even in 2016, had not only committed but met their commitments of no medically important antibiotic use. We did that in 2017. We could really figure out immediately after that Domino's, as you said, that they came up with that's the only company which came up with their policy after a study. Into just a couple of months ago, we released another study, reevaluated what has happened, what is the progress after 2 years, and unfortunately, still things are moving far slow. We still have no concrete public announcements or commitments to eliminate antibiotic misuse in chicken supply chains in India.
Avinash from Domino India has also asked, would inophorus be classified under antibiotics, especially the synthetic ones? Can somebody give him a quick answer on that before I move on? Amit?
Yeah, I think Colin can, or Sudhi can very well respond.
Yeah, I mean, ionophores are technically antibiotics. They're not used in human medicine at the moment, so they're not medically important antibiotics, but they meet all the scientific definition of an antibiotic. They're also known to be active against quite a wide variety of human pathogens, including things like Clostridium difficile and MRSA and Enterococci, but they're not used because of their toxicity. But there are some scientists in recent years who've started to say that actually it may be possible to use them in human medicine. But at the moment, they're not used in human medicine. There is some evidence coming from Norway that the use of ionophores in chickens has nevertheless been co-selecting for resistance to certain medically important antibiotics. It's not maybe very strong evidence, but it is actually fairly significant. It's the first time that this has been shown.
Fascinating. Haley, there's a specific question to you. How much of the world is interested to have phytogenesis as antibiotic alternatives? So a larger question, if I may sort of link that, I mean, the big issue with livestock and with agriculture, with food production, is about productivity. Now, clearly there's about the method of growing this, which is what Amit and Pauline are discussing, that we need to change the method so that it's less intensive, less prone to the need for antibiotics. But there's also the question about having alternatives to antibiotics so that vets and others can prescribe other options. So, Haley, what do you see as happening in terms of these alternatives? Are they gaining traction? Is there more interest in this? Or do you see this not happening enough yet?
So, thank you. So I think there is no question that all our efforts in finding alternatives to antimicrobials for our food and feed and agriculture it's extremely important. And one of the things as part of the One Health response that we need to focus is also to look the research and development, including the implementation research between these different sectors, how we can actually advance in terms of raising scientific interest and also investment. So when we look these investments and this interest in a truly One Health multi-sectoral approach around finding alternatives to antimicrobial, I don't think we are yet there. So I think this is another important area that truly needs multi-sectoral, cross-sectoral collaboration that we need to advance, and it also needs not only investment, but also scientific interest among scientists in a truly multi-sectoral manner.
Okay. My last question to Dr. Sudhi from Ajay Kumar. Poultry litter or dropping used in environment can pose a threat. Is there any method of poultry refuse treatment which can be adopted to reduce the risk, even if antibiotics are used in some emergencies? Dr.
Actually, as far as,
yes.
yeah, actually there are no methods to clear away the sewages and other things from the antibiotic residues. No methods are available. We have biofilms, so-called sewage treatment plants and other things, but those plants are not designed to clear away the antibiotic residues. And the problem is not with the residues. Actually, the problem is they are exposed to more microorganisms and they are gaining resistance. So those organisms can skip away from those sewages as when we put it as land fillings or fertilizers, and they pose a threat. It's not in the land alone. They can be washed off the soil and they can reach anywhere. So the problem is the litter is going to be a great threat because it will be having not only antibiotic residues but resistant bacteria also. So we cannot treat that very easily. If it is bacteria alone, we can of course use some so-called disinfectant sprays and other things which may kill off them, or we can use slime and other things which can be killing those organisms, make it sterile and other things.
Good. Okay, Vibha, last question. The issue of immunity has been raised many times. Many people have discussed the issue of immunity and therefore building up immunity as a way of dealing with this. Any insights very quickly that you want to give? Because then I want to give 5 minutes to wrap up this.
So to build up immunity, we have, especially against antibiotics, we have options such as, eating more probiotic food, which can promote the gut microflora, which helps you fight the bacterial infection. There are also options available such as not smoking. They kind of help you take lesser amount of antibiotics. So there are methods like this, which we have discussed in the book, and these can be used.
I think another plug for the book. Vibha has also put,
if I could show the pages which has something like this.
I think also Vibha has put the details of the book. Please do buy it. Every book you buy the money goes into CSC's corpus, so very useful. So it's a plug and a request to all of you. But let me take two of the most contentious issues that were raised, and I'd take the forgiveness of all the other panelists if you allow me to answer those two. Very Indian type questions, 3 questions that were raised that I think we need to give a clear answer to. One, why are you discussing this data for India and comparing it to EU and US? Indian use is much less and you are misleading people in India. That's been something which has been spoken about in this discussion group. The second issue is the issue about meat. And is this really about, therefore, should we just move to a plant-based diet? And that why are we not advocating plant-based diets and asking for meat production to go? And the third issue related to this has been that, you know, in India, we are actually not doing industrial poultry or industrial farming, and that in India, it is largely homestead farming. And so why are you raising these issues? Very important issues, and I want to take all three of them and discuss them very briefly with all of you, because I think these are very much issues why CSC is engaged in it. Firstly, let's be very clear that the data is showing, and our own analysis at CSC, when we have tested whether it was honey, whether it was poultry, or new tests that we are doing now, or the fact that we looked at crops, others have looked at crops, it is very clear that there are antibiotic residues. Now, the question is how high or low are they, and whether they are above a standard or below a safety standard that has been set. When we looked at honey, it was very clear that there was no standard set for the Indian consumer as far as antibiotic residue in honey were concerned. There were no standards for antibiotic residue in poultry for Indian consumers. And when we compared it to other parts of the world, it was clear that in certain cases they were high, in certain cases they were below the European or the US standards. But the point that we at CSC have been making is that India cannot afford this. We cannot afford to have antibiotic resistance because we are too poor a country. Therefore, we must stop comparing ourselves to the bad practices of everyone else in the world who have first had huge overloads of antibiotics and now have started reducing it because they have become wiser to it. We clearly have an opportunity to leapfrog. We clearly have an opportunity to do things differently. And that's really why it's important for us to raise it at this moment. We cannot wait for things to go at a per capita basis as high as the rest of the world. And a per capita comparison in India is absolutely the most inane way to do it because, and I'm using strong language, but please forgive me, but the fact is per capita means nothing in India. On a per capita basis, we have very poor people. And then we have middle class, and then we have richer people, and we have people who have extremely, just cannot afford the cost of the disease control that we have today. So we have to think of preventive approaches, which is why CSC's constant approach has been to test, to check, to inform, and to use that to guide policy. When we tested for honey, we found antibiotics in honey samples, and FSSAI has set some standards. As long as we can make sure that we have judicious use of antibiotics, that's what we are working towards. We are also working towards a complete ban on growth promoters, and that is some place where we've had some success, and maybe we can keep discussing it. And we are talking about, of course, that the critically important antibiotics for humans must not be used for livestock and for agriculture. So that's really the focus of our program. So please understand why we are doing this. We are not doing this to compare ourselves with Europe or the US. We are doing this because we believe we have a chance to do things differently today. And that's really where the second question comes in. Are we making too much out of this? There is not enough industrial farming in India as yet. Why are we talking about industrial farming? The fact is, in certain sectors, this is growing enormously. And it is very clear to us that this will grow and it can become completely unsustainable, as has happened in other parts of the world. Coylene talked very persuasively with great data from China and from Europe and from other parts where industrial farming is growing, and we are not far behind. So it's very important for India and also for large parts of Africa not to think about themselves as being on a ladder where they have to do industrial farming. They must understand the risks of it and the cost of it. And I think that's the effort that we need to be able to make to explain this today. Because I can tell you, when we looked at honey and we looked at chicken, it was very clear the poultry or the honey farming was a highly integrated system. And it was very important for us to therefore discuss it today and improve the regulations for these systems now, not tomorrow. And that's why the preventive agenda for us becomes so critical. My last point, and this is a very emotive discussion in India, so please forgive us, Coileen and Haley, you may not understand the nuances of this discussion, which is very emotive and very, very strong in India, is the issue of meat and plant-based diets. Now, CSC's position, let me make it very clear, is that we are not against meat. So we have to make our position to you very clear. However, what CSC has argued and continues to argue and will continue to argue, that it is not about meat eating per se or meat growing per se. It is about the quantity of meat we eat and the way the meat is grown. And that has been our position as far as meat and plant-based diets are concerned. So even though we are raising the issue of industrial livestock farming, we are not advocating here that we are saying a ban on meat production in our countries. We believe the growing of meat in a sustainable way is a great is a great livelihood support for small farmers. It is important for nutrition in our countries, but it needs to be, we need to understand that Indian farmers live within what we call an agro-silvo-pastoral system in which farmers and meat coexist. But it is the taking out of this meat, out of this context of homestead farming into industrial farming and making it a highly chemicalized, highly unhygienic system of growing food, which then requires the application of prophylactics as well as other disease preventive medicines, is what is causing the problem. So that's really where CSC comes from. And I say this because we strongly believe that this is really why we need to understand how we move ahead in what we call a one world approach, one health approach. When we looked at honey, it was very clear to us that the biodiversity of the bee getting destroyed, that we had Apis mellifera, which came into India, European bee, took over, monoculture, bee, which meant that the bee became more vulnerable to disease. So biodiversity becomes critical. It's also very important for us to please recognize that plant-based diet per se is not necessarily the best, because farmers, we have found, also use antibiotics on their plants. So the issue is the method of growing. The issue is the amount we eat. And I think that's what we want to keep discussing. So I'm already 10 minutes over the scheduled time. I'd like to thank each one of the panelists. From the questions and the chat that you will see, this has been an extremely rich webinar. Amazing questions, amazing participants. We've had very amazing people who have joined in from across the world. And it tells me that this is an issue which clearly needs much more elaboration, much more discussion. And so I hope Haley, I hope Anuj, I hope Sudhi and Coileen, you will allow us to call on you once again many more times so that we can actually do such very informative sessions to explain these issues and build a much better understanding of the challenges. So thank you again for joining me. Thank you everyone for each one of your questions and your issues. I love the passion with which each one of you has written the questions and chatted on our box. It tells us that this is really a time when we can think of change. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.